Welcome back to another reading and correcting of Stepping Up by Neat Kindar, the Tiger Writes, and Ty, the Tiger Supervisor. Today we are doing Chapter 78. Let me get this straight, Stick said. You want us to take on the guards, the Guild-back guards, and give our pay to good-for-nothing Omegas. We're not taking on the guards, Tibs replied. Sticks was a rogue and thin enough, Kieran had asked if he was sick, which had earned her an roll of the eye. Quigley had brought him to the planning after Tibs had told him, Jekyll, and Karina what Darren offered. Karina had brought in Josaka, and Samuel had simply showed up, saying Kamdar had suggested he come. While the cleric knew what Tibs was up to, he put to his obsessive search for secrets. Not that Tibs would have kept it from him if he'd asked. Sticks motioned to a server with his tankard before draining it. Keep telling yourself that when Knuckles throws you in a cell, and that's as long for helping you with this insane idea. Tibs knew the man was one of the recruits. He had stickier finger than Tibs, and they had had a few arguments over it. Okay, over him, that's no call. Being too free about which pocket he slipped his fingers into and how empty he left them. Samuel was an archer, one of the few survivors of the first arrival, whom Tibs had rarely interacted with despite that. Josaka was a sorcerer, and Tibs knew nothing about her other than Karina knew her. They were at Tibs' team's table, enjoying the ale that was back to its good standard. Knuckle isn't going to do that, he said. He likes Tibs too much, snorted. I'm with Stick, Josaka replied, looking at them cautiously. Guild has an interest in making sure they are in control of the dungeon, Jekyll replied. They've demonstrated how little they care about the town when they responded to my father's attacks. Barricading themselves in the building behind adventurers and all that magical protection wasn't much of a response. Quigley said, my exact point, Jekyll grinned. The warrior shook his head in annoyance. But unless the merchants stop paying their taxes to pay Tibs, I don't think we have to worry about the guild. They all looked at him. I didn't think to ask Darren about that. You should have, Josaka replied, if you're... Lay off, Josh, Karina said. Darren approached Tibs without saying what it was about. He didn't have the time to find out what kind of question he should ask. The sorceress looked around, some of her bluster melting away, simply saying that Tibs has a history of getting in over his head. Now he's pulling us in with him. No, Karina said. He's coming to us for help, to find out the best way to go about it, because he knows he doesn't have the experience needed to do it alone. Would you ask for help? Of course I'd ask you. Karina motioned to the others around the table, and Josaka's expression became guarded. Tibs isn't smart the way you and I are, or the way Jackal, Quigley, and Samuel are. She glared at the fighter's attempted protest down. But he is smart when it comes to asking questions and getting others to help him. He didn't tell Darren he was doing it. He said he'd see if he could. This is what we are here to decide, all of us. What's your problem with the Omegas, Stick? Quigley asked, as the thin man gave the server a sweet smile and almost reached for her hips. But he noticed Tib's eyes on him and pulled his hand away. Kind of obvious, ain't it? Said the tankard. I'm doing the work. I don't see why they should be the one benefiting. So they survive, Tib said. The rogue snorted. What do I care? They're the one feeding the dungeon. Better them than me. You should, Quigley said, because each one of who survives because we help them will be someone who shares the burden of protecting Muchuk Row once they are strong enough. He ran a finger along the rim of his tankard. Right now, our biggest problem, as far as I can see, is one of numbers. If Harry objects to what we're planning, we can't stop him from shutting us down. How final that is will depend on how much goodwill Tibs has built with the guild. But the more runners we add to our numbers, the easier it is to operate despite his protest. It's not like you need the coins, Jekyll said, with the loot the dungeon hands out. And how much of that do I get to keep? Stick replies, do any of you know how much this training we are forced to go through is costing, or that we're going to have to pay for it at some point? I don't know about you, but I'm not planning on being a slave to the guild for my entire life. Just like to look at Karina, I'll quickly look at Jekyll. I'll give you the detail later, Karina told her, and Jekyll simply offered a shrug. The merchants aren't going to pay us enough for that to make a difference, Tibs said. Didn't matter how much the merchant would offer. Tibs hadn't thought to ask about that either. But the coin the guild demanded for each day of training were gold. Only the dungeon could hope to afford that, and Alistair had told them that even that wouldn't be enough to pay for everything. Could be, if we charged enough. The grin Stick gave wasn't pleasant. After all, if they don't pay us, who's going to keep them safe from all the criminals in the town if we don't? Our guards? Stick quickly snapped as Tibs stood, water moving over his hand and forming into a jagged blade. I will, Tibs said, glaring at the road. The swords crackled as the water turned to ice, parts flaking off to reveal sharp points and edges. This is my town. If you don't want to help, that's fine. But I will protect the people here. I'm going to do it if no one pays me. Sebastian nearly destroyed us. I'm not letting you or anyone else try it. Hey, Stick said, raising his hand defensively. Relax. I was joking. Of course I wouldn't do anything against the town and the people here. Why is he here? Tibs asked, not taking his eyes off the road. He was lying. He didn't need to see the way he glowed to know it. Trying to excuse something with humor was something Tibs had been on the receiving end of often. Even Jekyll used it, but with him was to excuse the moments where he showed himself not as not being the idiot he wanted people to see him as. He's here, he replied reluctantly, because he has a better understanding of the rogues who came with us than I do. Proved instrumental in getting them to help and keeping them controlled while we survived what Sebastian threw at us. I also thought he understood what was important. Seems I was wrong about that. The dungeon. The town. The town, the warrior countered before Tibs could. Tibs wasn't sure how quickly kept his voice steady. The dungeons where we work. It's like the mines those who can't afford the land for their farms go so they can pay their taxes to. Looked around. Even Tibs had pulled his gaze from the road to look at him, wondering what he was talking about. Never mind. The point is that the town is where we live. If that goes to shit, how are we going to rest between runs? Really want the merchants pissed at you? Fine, fine. Stick took a nervous swallow. I'm on board. Honest, I am. He lied as Tib narrowed his eyes at him. But you can think of me as what you're going to have to deal with trying to convince the others. That wasn't a lie. And Tibs had trouble figuring out if it was because the rogue knew the others that well, or because he didn't and just believed they'd be like that. What kind of criminal are you? The surviving kind, Jekyll replied, and Tibs heard the smile in his voice. Maybe if we hadn't been sent here, those of us who survived our crime would be like you and no longer care about the larger painting made of everyone that affects and is affected by us. He paused. Maybe if I hadn't had met Tibs, I'd be like you anyway. But we're not. We had to depend on each other to survive, and we can take that what we learned, teach the new Omegas that they aren't alone either, and along the way make sure they don't die needlessly, and they will want to help the rest of us survive in return. Steve stared at the fire, stunned. I was told you were stupid, Josako said. Jekyll grinned proudly. Oh, I am the stupid one. If you think what I'm saying this sounds smart, maybe you should pay attention to what Tibs says a little more. I don't need to include Karina. You two are friends, so you already know she's the smartest person in this town. Don't lay it on so thick, Karina replied, rolling her eyes. The point remains, Jekyll said, I'm the idiot, so listen when Tibs speaks. Sticks stay seated, Jekyll said as the others stood. The discussion had gone on too long, as far as Tibs was concerned. They were going to help, so why worry about who would do what? What split of the payment made more sense to use for which group of Omegas? How would they decide which Omegas they helped? Because as much as Tibs wanted to help all of them, even he knew that was impossible. But the important conclusion that had been reached was that they would accept Darren's offer. The rest, the others would deal with, as far as Tibs was concerned. Tibs sat back down, as did Quigley. Erna looked at Jekyll, who shook his head, so she, Josaka, and Samuel laughed. The archer had offered a suggestion here and there, but on the whole seemed as mystified as to why he was there as Tibs was. He'd have to check with Commodore. You don't have to stay, he told the warrior. I brought Stick in. Whatever this is, I should be taking some of the fallout. Jekyll nodded. Stick looked too comfortable for Tibs' liking. First of all, Jekyll said, I want to make it clear that your help during the siege was invaluable. I don't think we would have lasted quite as long as we did if not for the way you kept the rogues in line and on our side. The smile the rogue gave showed he knew what he'd done and what he believed he was owed in return. So, take what I'm going to say next with that in mind. His expression darkened. If Tibs doesn't skewer you for what you're thinking of doing, I'm going to rip your head off. The smile vanished, replaced by confusion. See, I think you forgot who my father is, Fighter said. What he trained me to become. I know how you organize the rogue, and it's how you were able to keep it to be effective. The problem is for you is that I also know what the next step is. Now, you're thinking you're too important to be replaced. That if you die between the stable and the door, the other rogues would rise up and avenge you. You can't deal with that. The smile he gave the rogue wasn't pleasant. Just nod if you're even slightly close to what's been going through your mind. Stick nodded and swallowed. Now, here's where you're wrong. Those people you've organized, they aren't thieves or cutthroat. They're rogues. They're runners. The dungeon forces us to understand that everyone dies. So when you do, if you do, they're just going to look for someone else to take charge. There might be scuffles as they work out the order. But even if they know who caused it to happen, they aren't going to care. You aren't that important overall. And the guy who they end up rallying behind isn't going to let them cause the kind of trouble you're imagining. You, Stick stammered nervously. You sound rather certain of who'd replace me will act. Jekyll shrugged. I know Tibs. I know how Tibs think. Tibs narrowed his eyes at the fighter. He wasn't taking over anything. So, you need to decide what's really important to you, Stick. I'm not someone who wants to keep people in place through fear, but I understand its effectiveness. If that's what it takes, I can scare the shit out of you. Jekyll's smile turned sweet and Stick pale. But you'd prefer if Stick realized what we're doing. But you'd prefer if Stick realized that what we're doing is better for him, Quigley said. See, that's why I thought you should stick around. Jekyll replied. You're better with words than I am. We can't know how you lived, Stick, Quigley said. I can make guesses, they can't, but that's all they're going to be. But you aren't alone anymore. If you can understand that, this can turn into a good thing for you. Or at least a longer stop, Tibs ordered, and for once, Jekyll's mouth obeyed. Don preened next to the schedule. His name wasn't on it, because he was going before everyone, even the nobles. Tibs had been surprised to find out the schedule was up since there had been no gathering the day before, or as there had been the previous times Omegas arrived. He'd noticed a few arrivals throughout the previous day of young men and women escorted by guards, and Tibs had thought Harry was still organizing and would give his speech today. As the hero of Craggle Rock, it had been easy for Don to rebuild his team. Even those who hated him had found themselves without a team on On their return, had flocked to join. The sorcerer had been far too happy when he told some of them that no, they weren't suitable for his team. There are a lot more teams now, Ragnar remarked. Only 5 new ones among the nobles, Ness pointed out. Are any of those new teams the Omegas? Tibs asked. Is that why there are no gathering? I don't know, Tina said. Usually, by the time a dungeon is a row, everyone comes, pays for the chance. With it surviving the attack, it made sense they brought in convicts then, and after the way nearly everyone from that group died, recruits also made sense. Now, I don't think we're going to see any more convicts. Is that going to affect the plan? Tibs asked. Miss stared at him, his expression darkening. Well, Comdor simply smiled. When Tibs had asked him about Samuel, the clerk simply replied not to underestimate the man's value. In the following meeting, the archer had revealed a knowledge of the town that even Tibs didn't have, and he had been vital in planning patrol routes and scheduling. We'll have to see, Jekyll replied. They're still Omegas, so even if they pay to be here, they will need help. Did you have any idea what the 3rd floor is going to be like? He shook his head. We're going to have to discover that just like everyone else. Except we'll have the information the previous teams give us to help, Ness said, and looked at him. Won't we? You recognize any of the names before us? Jekyll said. Everyone new will have been told not to talk about the dungeon outside of it. They won't have our experience, but how the guild doesn't care. So this time, I think Tib's right. He grinned. It's going to be brand new for us. Tibs had told Jekyll and Karina of Stowe's request for them to explore the 3rd floor without foreknowledge, and the fighter had been eager for it. Well, Karina had only agreed reluctantly, and as a concession to Stowe being a person and not simply a creature. We have 2 weeks before it's our turn, so that's plenty of time to get in training. Did this siege I and Miss not count as training? Comdor asked, still looking the names over. Oh, I'm sorry, Jekyll replied. Did I say our training? I meant your training. Unless you and Mez got caught in a war of your own while you were enjoying your time away, you two need it much more than we do. Alistair's expression became one of pride on seeing Tibs. Your eyes, they're blue. The smile Tibs wore was forced. He hadn't been looking forward to this meeting, as used to functioning while channeling water as he was now. There would be a lot of lies with Alistair, and Tibs wasn't certain he had enough control not to give himself away to another rogue, not one far more experienced at it. He would have preferred not to channel the element for this, but too many people had seen Tibs' eyes while he channeled at this point, and carrying a story of the color coming and going had only worked in the early days. For Jekyll insisted Tibs always had water at the ready, both as an exercise in controlling himself and because that was the element he'd need to rely on until they were certain of his control of the other elements. None of them had been willing to even entertain testing them now that the town was filling again. It started happening after I came back, among the fighting. Sometime towards the end of it, they stayed blue. Alistair took Tibs' chin in and made him look up, studying his eyes. I heard about that. Nasty business. I'm glad you came out of it better. Like you'd have come. Tibs cursed himself mentally for letting that slip. Of course I would have. Tibs, if I'd been called, I would have taken part in protecting the town. Alistair didn't lie. Tibs hated his ability to tell that right now. Couldn't be angry at him for something he hadn't even known had taken place, and he didn't want to ask if Alistair would have defied the guild if they instructed him to stay out of it, the way Harry had. Harry had told him at some point that there were times when not asking a question was better than knowing the answer. It's understood what he meant now. He'd have to deal with the truth, no matter whether he wanted to or not. Alistair smiled and seemed invigorated. Now that you're fully rogue, we can move on to the good stuff. He led Tibs to a training room. And that concludes chapter 78. If you are enjoying this, please leave a like. You gotta know when the next one's going to be posted. Subscribe and hit the bell. If you want to read the story, it's available on Royal Road for free. If you want to support me and read further ahead of Royal Road, you can do that on my Patreon. You want to listen to me do these live, record these live, it's on Twitch every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time. The links are in the notes, and I shall wish you a good day.